So welcome to the Nonprofit Coach webinar series. This one is Making Networking Work, Finding Prospective Board Members and Donors. I am Elizabeth Finlayson. I'm the CEO and lead coach of the Nonprofit Coach, and we have a mission to create a fairer, more equitable world filled with empathy and beauty. And we do this by supporting our nonprofit clients with strategic planning, fundraising training, and support. So with that, I'll tell you a little bit about the services that we offer. We have coaching that we offer to nonprofits to getting into best practices around fundraising or nonprofit effectiveness at both 15 and 20 hours per year. And that really spreads it out and gives people a chance to take that information, metabolize it, and bring it into their nonprofits. We also do hands-on consulting around major giving, capital campaigns, grant writing, marketing services. We have an online grant writing course. And then, of course, we do these webinars, and they're available at the nonprofitcoach.guru, or if you want the latest ones, you can go to the YouTube channel at Elizabeth Finlayson. And I do want to tell you a little bit about what this thing is that you have agreed to come and sign up for, which is these are a bi-monthly webinar series. We started these at the beginning of the pandemic when we realized that this was going to be the third recession that I personally had fundraised through. And we knew that a lot of nonprofits were really going to struggle during this time. So we just made it our mission to get out a lot of information as quickly as possible so that nonprofits could pivot and be most effective in the pandemic environment. And how these have really evolved is to be twice a month. We do general topic overviews, or we do a deep dive into a slice of a broader topic. And I think that's really what we're doing today with Fred. We have guest speakers. So I'm really excited to have Fred's expertise here with us today. And I'm going to switch over to let him introduce himself and to tell you a little bit about what we're covering today.
Did you switch to me?
Go right ahead.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Elizabeth. And good afternoon, good morning, and evening. We have people with us from various parts of the United States, as well as France and Mexico. So I'm excited to be here today. When I do presentations like this, they are usually for companies and organizations which have engaged me, which means no outsiders. Today, I was able to invite friends and others to join Elizabeth's group. And so I thank them and everyone else for joining us today. I have a big task ahead. I'm about to contradict some of the earliest and most important advice your parents probably ever gave you. When you were about 4 years old, going outside to play, what did your parents tell you? Don't talk to strangers. That sage advice, often repeated, may be just why networking challenges so many people. You're talking to strangers. So why are people always talking about networking, telling you you have to do it? Almost every successful person attributes their success to relationships they've made, people who have opened doors to opportunities for them, and those relationships typically started with networking. I do want you to think of networking, though, as more than just meeting people. It's a process. It starts with an initial connection, the immediate follow-up, and the ongoing building and maintaining of the relationship. You're networking to build a web of relationships. Like a spider's web, the relationships near the center of your web are the strongest, your inner circle. But often the relationships further out bring some of the most special opportunities. And that's because those people don't know all the same people that your inner circle does. Your inner circle, you often know the same people. I suppose most of you apply strategic thinking to a lot of things you do. Today, we'll talk about making your networking strategic. When you take a strategic approach, your networking will be more successful, rewarding, and enjoyable, and connect you with more board candidates and donor prospects. Elizabeth? Let me ask. Huh?
Yeah, I was going to say, we're going to start with the first question here, which is, why does everybody say that you have to network?
Well, let me ask everyone a question. And actually, Elizabeth, go on to the next one, because I already answered, why does everybody say you have to network? There we go. Let me ask everyone a question. How do you feel when you think about going to network? Okay, please, this is interactive, so use the chat and give me a word, how you feel, your emotion when somebody said, when you're thinking about going to network.
Ooh, we've got excited, nervous. Let's see. Someone says, love it, but it's been a long time since I've been at an in-person networking event. Yeah, for a lot of us, maybe we're a little rusty with the pandemic. Someone wrote OMG, uncomfortable, scary, dread it. Someone said rusty, they feel a little bit rusty. Someone said fun and engage is an opportunity to meet other like-minded people. Yeah, these are all great. And we might feel a mix of those things. Someone says, I love being with new people. Another person said nervous.
Well, we have some of the most unusual answers I've ever had, or at least the quantity of them, because more than 90% of the responses I get are typically, and we have variations of this, fear, hate, definitely discomfort. And maybe some of the people, were trying to be positive when they didn't feel that way. It gave me positive answers like loving it and all that, but maybe indeed they do. And I every now and then have some of those same emotions. So imagine entering that big room at an event. You see a crowd of people. What do you do? Considering the emotions I just mentioned and some of what some of you said, most people look for someone they know and spend the entire reception time or event talking to those same people. Their reward, they eliminated the discomfort of talking to strangers. Now, if you have this bad habit, you need to change the routine you follow when you get the cue of seeing a crowd of strangers. Also, you need to find yourself a new reward. One way, try making your networking game-like. Define what winning means to you, your rules and your rewards for winning, your reward for winning. It's good to have extrinsic rewards if you can. Please, perhaps eat some chocolate, binge watch a Netflix series, whatever works best for you, but get that reward. Intrinsic rewards are nice, but surprisingly, typically not as motivating as extrinsic ones. Here's one example of how I made it fun for myself. I joined the Executives Club in 2003 and signed up to attend my first luncheon. I decided I would win if I met the chair of the organization at the luncheon, Miles White. At the time, he was CEO of Abbott Laboratories, the largest public company in the Chicagoland area. There was no opportunity to meet him during the reception before the luncheon as I had planned, because he was at a private reception. So I waited until the program ended and he came down from the dais. He got surrounded by about a dozen people and me. Half he knew and talked about getting together for lunch or golf or whatever. The other half each introduced themselves saying something like, hello, Mr. White, I'm Sam Smith. I enjoyed today's program. And I'm sure Miles White thanked them. I was the last person. I said to him, I've had the pleasure of working with Sharon Larkin at Chicago United. She makes Abbott looked great. I never even mentioned my name. This little elevator speech took less than 6 seconds. It had the 3 components every elevator speech should have: an attention getter, mentioning Sharon Larkin's name, one of Abbott's highest ranking African-American executives, content, 2 things: praising Sharon and informing him his company's 6-figure investment in Chicago United was paying dividends. And the third part of an elevator speech, memory maker, did what I say, create a memory for Miles White. Well, 3 months later at the holiday party, there was a receiving line with the Executives Club's officers. I extended my hand to greet Miles White. Before I could say a word, he pointed at me and said, "You're the one who knows Sharon Larkin." My reward for this little game-like thing I did is I have gotten to tell this story for the past 19 years. Elizabeth? I've talked a little bit about strategic networking. I really have an approach to strategic networking that has 3 basic building blocks: why, who, what. Why is defining your goal, and you can have several. I can give you more than 20 reasons why people network. Some of them are career advancement, making new friends, finding new board members, finding donors. The second W is who. Who are the people, your targets that will enable you to meet your goal? I always recommend starting with a personal inventory. Look at your LinkedIn connections, the people in your other online platforms. Check out your CRM system or whatever you use to keep track of people you know. Perhaps you still have a desk drawer filled with business cards. Look at the names of leaders in organizations you participate in. Then prioritize in some way those names, putting together a list of the people you plan to connect with. I simply put a 1, 2, or 3 by each name. I select a group from the ones that I will contact over the next 3 months, and I repeat the process. Then I set a goal of how many people I want to try to connect to each week and choose names for that goal from the ones in the 3-month list. And sometimes you may identify a group of people as targets. For example, a nonprofit I did consulting work for put together an annual program for financial advisors with a high-profile speaker. They were not a financial industry related organization. They were related to liberal arts and sciences colleges. They put together that program because financial advisors sometimes help their clients determine where to make charitable donations. An unexpected bonus: a few of the financial advisors were so intrigued by what they learned about the organization at those programs, they became both donors and board members. That leads to the last block: what? What will be your strategy for connecting with your targets? I just mentioned hosting an event that brings your targets to you. Sometimes I have chosen a target because somebody already knows the person and can make an introduction for me. When you don't have a connection to someone on your list, try to find somebody who does. LinkedIn is an awesome resource for doing that. Also, I use Google searches and sometimes find a connecting point between me and that target. When you do meet a target, you need to say the right thing to engage, connect, and start building a relationship. Some of my best spontaneous remarks have been planned 3 or 4 weeks in advance, like what I said to Miles White. Since he was a target, I had the opportunity to think about what I would say in advance. Your remarks should focus on your target, something of interest to him or her. What I said to Miles White had nothing to do with me. It was all about things potentially important to him. When you can't find a connection to a target, look for a place where your target might be. They may be a guest speaker at an event or attending an event because they're directly connected to the speaker. Perhaps they're involved in an organization. You might consider attending one of that organization's events. Be creative. Maybe you can share something you think would interest that target, something published or an announcement of an upcoming event. You may find clues about their interest in their LinkedIn profile, Facebook, Instagram, or through an internet search. Maybe you've discovered that you share a common interest, and that can get a conversation started, a connection started. Even when you have targets, you will still meet people randomly. You need to be ready for that first interaction. The common dialogue when meeting someone goes something like this. How do you do? What do you do? You have only about 5 to 10 seconds to engage someone. People have very short attention spans. Saying something like, I am an attorney, won't generate much curiosity for someone to learn more about you. I have about 5 to 10 different ways I introduce myself. For example, I sometimes say I am a difference maker. And that's because I do a lot of work helping diverse clients find corporate board of directors positions. Another way, a networking architect, an opportunity locksmith. Something I just thought of earlier this week, an alchemist. I help clients turn things into gold. Think of ways to introduce yourself that make people say, tell me more, or what does that mean? And I should highlight here, this is usually the most intriguing part of my presentations, and that people immediately start thinking, how am I going to introduce myself next time? What can I come up with? Strategic networking is a key component of personal branding. A few other personal branding things you could do to build your network of relationships include public speaking and writing, and social media is part of that writing. Another opportunity, associations have trade journals and electronic publications for their members. Perhaps you can write an article related to their members about serving on a nonprofit board or the importance of supporting a charity. Maybe you could get a speaking opportunity at their annual meeting. Maybe just attending their annual meeting and working the crowd. Do you participate in organizations as a member, as a leader? If so, you might have built relationships with people who may be able to help you achieve your goals. Choosing the right organization requires a strategy, which I don't have time to discuss with you today because there's such a multitude of different organizations, and choosing the right one entails a lot of different factors. Elizabeth, let's move on to board members. So who's my next board member? Let's apply the 3 W's of strategic networking. Why do you want new board members? Perhaps to increase the number of board members, replace a board member leaving, fill a gap in the skills or demographics of your board? The first 2 are pretty straightforward. Filling a gap. Have you looked at the expertise and experience of your current board members? You may discover a missing skill. For example, it could be marketing, finance, human resources, social media, or other areas. Do you have the best mix of board members relevant to your organization regarding race, ethnicity, gender, age, religion, sexual orientation, wealth? Every board needs some diversity and wealth. The best way to methodically determine what's missing is to complete a board skills matrix. If you search on the internet, you will find examples you could use as a start and then edit them to meet the profile and needs of your organization. Just do a Google search, board skills matrix. Who? Identify people you think would fit based on what we just talked about, as well as the culture of your board. Your lay leaders and professional staff should suggest names to your nominating chair. Another source, you may get candidate names by looking at other organizations that may have similar or complementary missions. You could sometimes get candidates by mentioning in your organization in conversation I just glanced at the chat and I lost my train of thought. When a friend asks how things are going, you might say a few words about your organization and its quest to get a new board member with expertise in social media, for example. You want to say enough for someone to focus on how they might help you. And did we answer, I noticed that there were some questions coming through. Did we get them all, Elizabeth? In the chat?
I think so.
Okay. The what regarding finding board members. Determine the best way to connect to a board candidate to gauge their interest. Each situation is different as to who should make that contact. And if it goes that far, who should extend the invitation to join your board. I just mentioned filling a gap. If I wanted someone with marketing expertise, I might look at the American Marketing Association as a potential source of names. Elizabeth, now on to donors. Once again, the why. Annual individual donors, major annual individual donors, different amounts qualify as major for different organizations, special campaign individual donors, foundation donors. Those are pretty much your why you are networking when you're looking at donors. Who? Prospects identified by board members and professional staff, prospects referred by other givers, givers to other similar organizations, foundations whose criteria match your organizations, anyone you think of or interact with who makes sense to solicit. The what is really the solicitation process. I've done that for many years as a volunteer leader, 1 year as a professional, and also did some solicitation training several years ago. But that's not my focus here today. If you're interested in learning more about solicitation, I suggest you talk to Elizabeth, the nonprofit coach, about that topic. In summary, network strategically. 2 things you can start doing right away. 1, clearly identify your networking goal and build a target list. 2, decide how you will introduce yourself to both targets and random connections. Being strategic makes networking work for more rewarding results. And thank you. Does anyone have any questions? I covered a lot real quickly, a little bit faster than I thought I would, but I am open for questions, and either related to what I just said or other questions you might have about networking. And you could unmute yourself and ask the question.
Yes, hi, Fred, this is Blanca. I just have a question that, what is your opinion about that time to reconcile your networking or list of networking? So do you recommend that time to time we clean it up, or what is your opinion about this?
To reconcile your networking, you're saying, Blanca?
Yeah, just to revalidate your list. most probably that, you know, sometimes with whom you connected, like maybe 10 years back, they are no longer relevant because you changed careers or you shifted. So what is your opinion about that?
Okay, my opinion is that you highlight the connections that you are keeping in contact with on a regular basis. I do not recommend ending any relationship definitively, unless perhaps they have passed away, or you find that they are, that you've discovered they don't have the values that you appreciate. Otherwise, you mentioned how you've moved on in the 10 years. That contact you had 10 years ago may have also moved on, and they are relevant again.
We're getting a few questions jumping up in the chat. So
sure, I see it. Any suggestions on that? The first one, or you got a handle on this, Elizabeth? Why don't you repeat the question?
Well, I think that, yeah, the first one is, and I think this makes so much sense in this environment, is that, you know, people aren't getting together in person as much right now. And so what suggestions do you have about networking when people aren't maybe hosting as many physical in-person events?
Okay, a couple of different things, and some of them also apply to in-person. So I have attended quite a few Zoom meetings, probably most of you have as well. And I love the breakout rooms. When I get into a breakout room, there's the ones that are done well typically have anywhere from 4 to about 8 people. And people have an opportunity to engage in some level of dialogue amongst the group. And I think in just about every one of them, people have connected afterwards. Not everyone, but a number of people in those breakout rooms have connected. So I strongly recommend participating in the breakout rooms that are part of Zoom meetings when offered, and also making connections, checking, you know, we have our most limited resource is our time. So you may want to make note of the names of the people in your breakout room, and then take a look at LinkedIn. And if they are of additional interest in making a connection, then reach out and invite them to connect on LinkedIn. You can also do something like that with the speakers and other participants as you see questions that move through the chat. Let me do that, the last part first, the chat. I was attending a conference and I saw somebody ask a question in the chat, and I did not hear the question answered. And I had an answer for the person. So I tracked them down through LinkedIn and answered their question for them. So that's something you could do. This is all sort of, some of this is being creative in your thinking of how you connect to people. In terms of, you could see the list of participants, you know, that's often an option. Not always, often an option. You could see a list of participants that are attending a program like you can do today. You can highlight the whole list and copy and paste, and then sort of look to see if there are people you want to connect to. You have the host and the speakers of the program. You can reach out to them afterwards and talk about what you heard, ask a question, say something, perhaps I didn't have a chance to ask this question, or I didn't think about it until after the program, and you're making a connection that way. If it's an organization that's hosting the program, you could, afterwards, you could look at the board members of that organization or any other online lists, perhaps professional staff of that organization, and reach out to them after the program, making reference to the program.
And if I can add a few things, I'd like to point out that actually how Fred and I got connected was through a networking connection. And that, we were able to see that there are some things that we had in common. And then it made sense to ask him to, be a guest. And I think the other thing I would say is that, speaking about Fred, in my experience, is that there's a thoughtfulness that I think you bring to networking that distinguishes you from other people. So it's not kind of a one and done. I see that you continuing to maintain a relationship, and those types of things. When you're describing these tactics, many of us have been in Zoom meetings. How many of us have done the things that Fred is describing here?
Okay. And
here's another question. Oh yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So you had brought up this idea of, let's say you're a nonprofit and you're actually trying to target a particular group of people. You brought up about financial advisors for this particular nonprofit. So can you explain more about this idea of having an event specifically to bring that target audience into your nonprofit?
Okay, I'll give you one example. Well, they first, once again, identified financial advisors as being a wonderful resource to find support for their nonprofit organization, because financial advisors deal with high net worth individuals, typically. Okay, and as I said, they often are sought for their advice. Sometimes they offer it without being asked for it on the philanthropic side of their clients. Now, the organization put together a program that was of interest to financial advisors. And you could, once again, be creative and try to think of programs you could put together for whatever group you want, but try to make it a little bit special. And so one of the things that they did for this group of financial advisors was to make sure that they had distinguished speakers. So one time the speaker was Terry Savage, who is on television, has written books on finance, and lots of the financial advisors wanted to come and hear her speak. And it was a fairly intimate group. It was maybe 30 or 40 people, done in a nice location. And it was not only, it was great marketing for the organization, as well as a source of donors, because all of those financial advisors walked out knowing much more about the sponsor of the program. The sponsor, the head of the organization, did the opening remarks, introduced Terry Savage, or actually one of the lay leaders of the organization introduced Terry Savage. And then at the end, thanked everybody, once again, the head of the organization, and made those impressions associated with a good program. So there was good feeling about the program, which translated into good feeling about the organization. Now, there are lots of organizations out there, lots of professions out there, but it's basically offering a group of people something that they would like. Now, the other thing you could do is, another way to look at this is perhaps put together a panel on a topic that is some way related to your organization. Like it could be choosing the right places to donate money. Now that may not be a good one because maybe nobody mentions your organization, but figuring out a good topic and then putting together a panel of people that you want to meet and inviting them to participate on the panel, because you are giving them something with this invitation to address a group of people. So unlike making a cold call just to make a solicitation or to attract somebody to a board, you're actually offering them something and they are becoming a connection of yours. And they'll also take your phone call because you're inviting them to speak. Typically, they will. And
There's another, oh,
yeah,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
I was going to say, there's another great question in the chat. So Carl asked, you want to know what is the plan or the tool for keeping and developing all of these relationships? You mentioned like maybe a CRM. I guess, what do you use or what do you see other people using?
Well, I just answered that question the other day for Blanca. We had a call, one of the participants today. There are a number of different things you could do. I do use a CRM system, and which has built in when I want to recontact certain people. Okay, so it may be weekly, monthly, quarterly, semi-annually, annually. That goes for some of the people. Okay, but networks are larger and larger today, especially because of social media and things like that. So I actually will use social media to stay in contact with more people. They'll see my posts, you know, and so I will stay in their mind. You know, on a practical basis, you can't keep in direct contact with a lot of people, but I will send out like group emails. And I always do, I have a system where I could make them personalized, individual, not to, you know, not from Fred to Fred and BCC Elizabeth. Okay, we all get a number of those, but mine would be from Fred to Elizabeth. And I could do that. I do that for things like holidays. I will send out a whole bunch of holiday messages. I have gotten into the habit of creating little videos, animated videos, or not necessarily with me in the picture, but I will often add a voiceover, like a Happy New Year or a Merry Christmas, or some of the things I do include, I hope the second half of 2022 is rewarding for you. I'm not sure that's the exact words I would use, but I would send that out around July 1st. You know, when we start the second half of 2022, there are so many reasons you could send simple messages that used to be done via greeting cards. Well, some of them did, you know, but that you could go through your names and addresses or your name lists, your contact list, and say, okay, here's, let's say 100 or 200 that I am going to send out these messages for the for July 4th holiday, the beginning of the second quarter, the end of the year. Right now, a message you could send out is, I hope you had a great start to 2022. And so there's ways that you could send out group messages that aren't solicitous, but that keep you top of mind and maintain your connection.
There's another question in the chat about how do we find more networking meetings, that this person's looking to get into more public schools, but finding like social media and calls not really helping to get through. So I know in Chicago, there used to be places where they were just lists, or you could just Google it. And I don't know if that's something that you do, Fred, or I've often find kind of what you're saying is, if I know what my target audience is, I can say, oh, looking for financial advisor networking events or whatever that is. What are your thoughts, Fred?
Well, you just hit on one. If there is a profession, there is, one of the things I love are associations. There's an association for almost everything. So if you want to meet people for some reason in the frozen foods industry, and I'll give you an example why you might want to do that. There is, I'm sure, a frozen foods industry association. Okay. And the reason you may want to go to a frozen foods industry association meeting is because maybe one of your current board members is a member of the Frozen Foods Association, and you've discovered this and you want to go with that person because they will brag when they introduce you, they will brag about the organization they're involved in. Maybe even brag about you, and it's always easier to have somebody else boast about you than boast about yourself. Now, in terms of things less than that, it really is exploring interests. For example, to some people that I've worked with, I have suggested the council in Chicago, the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, because they have an interest in international relations. Okay, you're going to be with a whole group of people that share your interest. So your networking is already off to a running start. Why are you here? Which is always a great question to ask in any networking situation. You know, in that big crowd I mentioned earlier, what brought you here tonight? What brought you here today? There are various organizations, actually, and I apologize to the people outside of Chicago, but there's relevant publications and sources in almost every community. Cranes used to have a calendar online, Cranes Chicago Business, a business publication here in the city, used to have a publication, used to publicize all the great events happening. Another one that I just mentioned the other day in Chicago, there's the International Trade Association of Greater Chicago. If you're interested in international trade or connecting with people from other countries, they publish a calendar weekly of an amazing list of different events that you can go to. There's just, I'm trying to think if there's any specific sources. I've never done it, but people have talked every now and then about meetups, and either attending one of those meetups that has an area of interest to you, or I believe you can even start your own meetup on a subject. The other thing, there are publications that list, if you want to attend charity events, there are lists. Cranes, once again, publishes a list for the year, usually in January, I think. Not sure about that. But also, what was the other one? Oh, there's publications. Once again, a Chicago one is Chicago Social, that has a list of all sorts of upcoming events in every monthly issue. And those may be places, those cost money to go to, but maybe a place you want to go to.
But you're right. Attending other organizations' events is often a good one. You're already with a group of like philanthropic or semi-philanthropic people in those rooms. And one thing I would say of, 20 years of being in the nonprofit sector, we don't get out of our offices enough. And I know it's because we have too much work to do. We just have too much to do. It's totally true. But, think about how much easier your workload would be if you got in front of the right people and those people were making larger contributions to your organization, or were that really effective board member who took a part of your work and redid your human resources manual, or did something that was really significantly contributory to your nonprofit. You would have less work. And so sometimes we really just have to remind ourselves to get out, whether it's a digital get out. I think maybe earlier in the pandemic, Fred, when you and I met, we had a conversation about the opportunity now, because networking can be over Zoom. Maybe our networking isn't restrained to Chicago, it's restrained to, like, here, people all across the country or the world, right? And so now my network is people in France and people in Mexico and people in California, people in New York. That makes us all more valuable. So that's the other thing, is it can be a limitation, but it can also be a point of growth.
Right. No, absolutely. And in fact, I started the year with 3 additional clients, and I knew I could always work anywhere because most of my work is done virtually. although I used to get together with some clients in person weekly. But 2 of my 3 clients, one's in Minneapolis and one's in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And we're all used to being on Zoom and Google Meet and other social, online places that were not in person. And so there's a comfort level. Another thing that I found at the beginning when we met Elizabeth is that there was great access to people. It's pulled back a little bit now, but since everybody was online, people that you might have had to go through a receptionist or an assistant to gain access to, now were answering their own stuff. And so that was a benefit as well. There was one other thing, I don't remember what it was that I was going to add, but got more questions?
Well, there's a great suggestion in the chat. And I was also going to say, I had a client once who their project was related to a celebrity, and they tracked them down through social media and got them, and then they became, they went into negotiations with their office. So it is surprising sometimes, like, what you can accomplish if you are strategic about it, knowing I really want to speak to this person, not every celebrity ever, this particular person for a particular reason. In the chat, Adi's got some great stuff here. He says online, there's Meetup, Eventbrite has some for global networking, there's Lunch Club, great things there. And, there's a question here, and it might be a little bit, I think, beyond what we're really covering today, although, Mickey, I think this is something that we talk about the nonprofit coach is, what are the best tips in email marketing as an effective strategy for donor cultivation or acquiring new donors? Is that something you feel like you can answer, Fred, or?
I will give you the answer that that I usually do, because I've identified people that there's some connection to. I've gone through my list of names, and I have 50 people that I want to contact for a nonprofit that I'm involved in. And my strategy is to actually pick up the phone. It's more personal. There's a better reaction only about 95 to 99% of the time than an email. Email marketing is good for a wide, to cast a wide reach out. And I guess the question I would have is, in terms of acquiring new donors, do you have any connection to them at all, prior to doing that reach out via email? And if you do that reach out via email, do you have, since it is, I think there are rules that you have to follow. Have they opted in to receive your solicitation? Or might you be creating ill will against your organization? But as for expertise in email strategies, not my area.
I think I'll just kind of add to that, because we definitely use email as part of donor cultivation and acquisition. But I would agree with Fred that it's really part of a wider net. You're looking for a lot of small donations versus large donations. So this type of networking, we're really talking about focus in relationships. We're talking about board members. We're talking about major donors. We're talking about people who open doors to more people who open doors to more people. That's different than when we've got an email list and we're trying to make sure a certain percentage of them donate or renew or continue to engage with us. So they really kind of have these different ways of reaching to people. They're both really important, but they have different goals, getting back to Fred's original point.
Now, one thing I do with email, though, is I keep potential donors and current donors additionally informed about the organization beyond what the organization alone does. So that I keep that, I keep top of mind, so that when I do solicit them, it's not like July 1st every year. And hey, Fred, I haven't heard from you from a year, and now you're just asking me for money again.
So, I know a lot of people who join these webinars come from small organizations. And so we don't always have the staffing to do this. But ideally, you have someone who's within your nonprofit who's playing a relationship manager role. It could be that they're the only development person in your entire organization. And so they're juggling some of those broader reach strategies as well as that relationship management. It might be that you don't have any staff and the executive director is playing all of those roles. And obviously it gets harder the less staffing that you have. But if you can think about this as a hat you might take on and off, that like who's put on the relationship manager hat for the organization, how often are they wearing that hat? And are we really keeping in contact with donors and potential donors? This is really kind of right into that. I think we need to keep moving on, but there was really great questions here. So I want to thank all of you. I feel really happy that Fred has offered something to anyone who's participated in the webinar. So Fred, I will let you state what you're offering.
Well, it says it right there. If anybody would like to talk to me, I am willing to spend 30 minutes with them talking about strategic networking, whatever concerns they have, however I might be able to help them in their strategies of connecting to people. I do charge a lot of money typically for this, but I am more than happy and grateful to everybody that came today, as well as to Elizabeth. And this is my way of saying thank you.
Well, thank you, Fred. And I would like for you to take a moment to state better than I could for you about what you do as your paid professional work. So you don't normally go into nonprofits and help nonprofit people with this. You have a specific role in the mission that you fulfill that I think is inspiring. And I also think for those of you who are interested in that part or interested for your board members, I'd love for you to hear what Fred does outside of helping all of us today.
Okay, well, I do presentations like this, actually workshops. They're typically an hour to an hour and a half, both for companies, corporations, as well as for nonprofits. I've been involved in nonprofits for over 35 years now in various roles, leadership roles, and all sorts of different roles. My primary focus today is helping diverse clients that are seeking corporate board of directors positions. And so I work with, in terms of the representation on boards, I work with the bottom part of the ladder, which is Latinas, Latinos, who are at the very bottom of the ladder, then Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders, who are next up on the bottom of the ladder, and African Americans, who are sort of at the top of the bottom. But woefully, all are dramatically underrepresented. But I don't really heavily emphasize the underrepresentation as I'm helping them make connections. And I help my clients to prepare in terms of their CVs, their bios, and changing their LinkedIn profiles to make them more board oriented. But the people that I work with really have a lot to offer. It's not just saying we have a so-and-so on our board. These people have really dramatic talents and expertise that are beneficial to boards. And there have been several studies done now over the past several years that have shown that organizations that have diversity in the leadership, both the management as well as the board of directors, outperform other organizations. And so I do my best to make a difference in that way. That's why I sometimes say I'm a difference maker.
Well, that's fantastic. Thanks, Fred. We've talked a lot about bringing new people in, getting them onto your boards, getting them to be major donors. I'm just going to highlight one of the services a nonprofit coach offers, which is board development, helping with pipelines, recruitment, and effectiveness. So sometimes people got in a bunch of those new board members and then they say, help, we need to be able to get everybody working together well and reaching up to a higher level. So that's there. Thank you so much. And if you are interested in reaching out to either Fred or our team at the Nonprofit Coach, please feel free to do so at these numbers. And thank you all for being here today.
Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful afternoon
Thank you all.
or evening or
Thank you.
morning.
Bye-bye.
And a great